scenario of a cyber attack of the U.S. banking system is but one possible plan he was privy to. Though the whistleblower admitted that DHS, the NSA, and IRS are all militant totalitarian arms of the White House, he doubtedly emphasized that it's not Obama pulling all these strings. Obama is a creation of the globalists who have no allegiance to any political party. He is a product of decades of planning made for this very time in our history. He was selected to oversee the events I just disclosed. Who has that ability? He's a product of our own intelligence agencies working with the globalists. He should be Exhibit A to illustrate the need to enforce the Logan Act. Unlike the whistleblowing general, the former Homeland Security employee said he did not know the exact timing of when he foresees the plan to be executed with high probability of two near simultaneous false flags triggering martial law and the violence directed against U.S. citizens. But the general did, feeling certain that Jade Helm would go live in response to the government-induced crisis. Because we live in an interconnected global economy, the disaster that will soon afflict the U.S. will reverberate with ripple effects around the globe. And though many Americans who will refuse to believe that any such harm can possibly come to the United States, that relative to most of the world had it so good for so long, the globalists responsible are heartless evildoers with no compassion or guilt for the atrocities and suffering they directly inflict on mankind. Bringing down America puts them one step closer to the one world government. It will be up to us patriots, like the revolutionaries of our war of independence, to fight for our liberty and life for a rebirth of a nation fashioned after what was our founding fathers' lasting legacy.
Couldn't have said it any better myself.
And so for anyone that hasn't seen the news yet, we live here in Oregon, I do, and last night was the first night of Jade Helm. So we saw, there's a clip that I have that has military Blackhawks flying side by side, and we don't have an army base anywhere near us. We've never seen people in camouflage fatigues and whatnot. Last night, from about 2:30 to about 5:30, there were all sorts of night action going on, and they have some actual footage from right across the river where they were stationing in Dallasport, Washington, and they were essentially doing black op missions of some sort. And that's not the only thing. Over in Flint, Michigan yesterday, they did the same thing. Nobody in the town of Flint had a clue that the Army was even going to be there, because remember, Seth, it's only going to be in 7 states, right? So what are they doing in Oregon? What are they doing in Flint? And why are they in the middle of the night? What kind of operations are they running? So, people, you really need to wake up. You really need to look about what's going on. And it doesn't matter if this is martial law or not. What it matters is that we're letting somebody attack us mentally like this. We're letting people have this kind of control over us. And for what? This operation has cost the military $10 billion to date to move all this equipment in and around the U.S., to pay all the soldiers to do this. Do we have $10 billion sitting around free and clear? I don't think so. So this is for this to be a drill and a drill only, it makes absolutely no sense that we would go cash a check for $1 billion, $10 billion, and roll everybody out. Seth, what do you think?
Oh, I agree 100%. I think your take on it there pretty much said everything I could say on it. We've got the Jade program that we covered there that the NSA is using in lifetime in addition to Jade Helm, which is the Jade in Jade Helm. That's the entire reason they're doing that. Helm, literally a military sense. They're combining the two into one thing of a lifetime data gathering stream that they can put in and use that to create its own sort of, like, not quite a military algorithm, but a program, pretty much an algorithm.
Well, it tells you where to deploy troops at. From the government's own documents, it takes every bit of live data. And so for folks that don't understand what live data is, that's you guys sitting on your phones, tweeting and Facebooking and doing all the stuff that you do, sending a text message. Every last bit of that information is going into the Jade program, which is comprised of 3 separate software programs. And one of them filters the data, the other one analyzes the data, and the other one basically tells you where you could need to put troops to put people down to maintain control. So this is an artificial intelligence war machine that we don't have a lot of chance on. If somebody decides to text, let's start a revolution, let's fight these guys, all of a sudden you're going to have Blackhawks at your house and probably a bag over your head in the back of whatever, a car or van. It's just, it's
a
unreal.
Bearcat, something like that, that they got running
yeah,
there. Yeah.
And this is ongoing because there's been, for folks that don't know, the Blue Bunny ice cream truck of all things, it was caught going down the freeway with a convoy, and they denied it at first, and then another set of pictures erupted that had them all parked together at rest areas. And it's just, you're looking at people like Walmart, the entire Walmart Foundation, who America essentially has brought to power, to extreme power, very extreme wealth, and now they're clearing out. And when I say clearing out, there are videos that have surfaced of what the plumbing issues look like in there, and there's no such thing as plumbing. In fact, it looks like a prison, basically entry-level place where you go in prison and you check in and they classify you. This is exactly what this looks like. It looks like a classification system, and it makes no sense. They're hauling the shelves out for plumbing issues, and anyone that doesn't understand, Walmart can build a complete super Walmart in 18 months, 8 to 18 months. So when you're talking closing for 6 months, losing hundreds of millions of dollars for plumbing, and there is more on this. That when we say breaking news, we're talking breaking news today. There's 2 more Walmarts that have come up that aren't on the list, that all of a sudden have shut down, pulled their signs down, and now are stripping them out as well. And they're in places that you just wouldn't think. And most of these Walmarts are within just a couple of clicks of train stations and tracks. So if you put all this together and it smells like crap, there's got to be something going on. And I urge everybody, if it's not already too late, to get up, take this stand, and fight this. If not, I don't think we're going to have too much of a chance left.
Agreed. Well, in other news tonight, we have blast at Ghana petrol station kills 90 seeking shelter from storm. This is out of Reuters. An explosion at a petrol station in Ghana's capital killed around 90 people sheltering from a storm early on Thursday, emergency services said, in the worst disaster to strike the West African state in more than a decade. The force of the blast gave a few a chance to escape. People were burned beyond recognition where they stood under the station's awning or trapped in the charred wreckage of cars and minivans parked in its forecourt. The accident was caused by a fire at a nearby lorry terminal. Flames spread to a state-run Goil, G-O-I-L, petrol station via spilt fuel floating in floodwater, Fire Brigade spokesman Prince Billy Anaglate said. Quote, "It was an explosive fire, and so the people sheltering at the filling station did not have an opportunity to escape," Anaglate said. It was Ghana's worst disaster since more than 120 people died in May of 2001 in a stampede at the nation's stadium during a soccer match, a police spokesman said. The incident exposed Accra's vulnerability to storms, given poor drainage and weak infrastructure that has failed to keep pace with population growth after years of rapid economic expansion. Low-wage workers struggling to get home through the storm, with roads closed and minivan buses not running, formed the bulk of those caught in the explosion, witnesses said. Several other people were swept away by the seasonal storm in the coastal city, and thousands more were made homeless by the flood as the floodwaters rose, officials said. Ghana is one of Africa's most stable democracies, and for years its exports of gold, cocoa, and oil have made it one of the continent's fastest-growing economies. But since 2013, it has wrestled with a fiscal crisis and lower commodity prices, and growth this year is projected to fall below the average for sub-Saharan Africa. By morning, Ghana's security forces had doused the flames and secured the area, taking back anxious crowds. Rescue workers wearing face masks retrieving the remaining bodies, including that of a small child, and piled them onto a truck. Some cars were still smoldering. President John Mahama said he was heartbroken by the loss of life. He blamed the floods partly on people building homes and businesses on waterways, blocking the city's drainage systems. And as a Two Real News take there, I'd say that's what happens when government infrastructure fails, but also something that's just natural disasters and everything like that. It's one of the main reasons you got to enjoy life while you can, and always be just thank God for what you have that you're fortunate enough to have and not what you don't have, because something like this could happen any day.
Amen. Yeah, perfect. I couldn't say that any better. The FBI could raid your mechanic because of General Motors. Washington, D.C. General Motors, the company that took billions from the American people, now say that those people that bought and paid off cars don't actually own the car because the company's software is still inside it. I heard the same thing with Obama just a little bit ago about businesses as well. Even though the car is paid off, the person that thought they owned the vehicle has actually just licensed it. Not satisfied with bilking the taxpayers out of anywhere between $9 and $14 billion, GM wants to stop owners from working on their own vehicles. The reason is simple. It isn't about defending the copyright of software, as the lawyers argue. It's to keep consumers stuck in using GM's price gouging service department. There are hearings currently underway in which GM is asking the Copyright Office to stop granting exemptions to their car computer software. General Motors is quite literally attempting to use the guns of the government to force you to continue to use their service. Sounds like an exaggeration of rhetoric, right? If a mechanic does alter the software in a car's onboard computer, he will have violated GM's copyright. Violations of the Digital Millennium Copyright Act are enforced by the Federal Bureau of Investigation. Working on a car without the express written permission of GM could end up in federal charges. The electric fight for the future opposes GM's move because it would prevent independent analysis of safety components within the car's systems. Given the fact that the Department of Justice has found criminal wrongdoing on the part of General Motors in relation to deaths caused by faulty equipment, there is not much doubt that GM sees the ability to block independent review of their equipment as a bonus. It's probably past time to stop buying this company's products. At the very least, you could voice your concerns on the company's Facebook page.
Most definitely. I'd say that was a very good story. I think that might tie in a little bit with what we were talking about earlier as far as Jade Helm and whatnot, because it is the creation of essentially a fascist state there of corporatism at its finest. However, in other news, we have this out of Breitbart.com. Progressive professor. My progressive students terrify me. A progressive professor says his students have become enamored of a simplistic social justice politic with simplistic social justice politics that makes every political discussion personal and therefore a potential threat to their identity. At the heart of the Vox article is the claim that something has changed on campus. In the past, a student complaint about political bias would have been handled perfunctorily. The complaint would be acknowledged and then it would be ignored. But some times are changing. But times are changing. With an increasing focus on social justice and identity politics, students now take every disagreement personally, and professors feel pressure to avoid giving any offense, intended or not. This new understanding of social justice politics resembles what University of Pennsylvania political science professor Adolph Reed Jr. calls the politics of personal testimony, in which the feelings of individuals are the primary or even exclusive means through which social issues are understood and discussed. Reed derides this sort of political approach as essentially being a non-politics, a discourse that, quote, is focused much more on taxonomy than politics, which emphasizes the names by which we should call some strains of inequality over specifying the mechanisms that produce them or even the steps that can be taken to combat them. Under such a conception, people become more concerned with signaling goodness, usually through semantics and empty gestures, than with actually working to effect change. Herein lies the folly of oversimplified identity politics. While identity concerns obviously warrant analysis, and focusing on them too exclusively draws our attention so far inward that none of our analysis can lead to action. Rebecca Riley Cooper, a political philosopher at the University of Warwick, worries about the effectiveness of a politics in which particular experiences can never legitimately speak for anyone other than ourselves, and personal narrative and testimony are elevated to such a degree that there can be no objective standpoint from which to examine their veracity. Personal experiences and feelings aren't just a salient touchstone of contemporary identity politics. They are the entirety of these politics. In such an environment, it's no wonder that students are so prone to elevate minor slights to protestable offenses. The author's description of this behavior on campus is in line with other recent pieces on the same topic. What's new here is an attempt to offer a functional criticism of the behavior. Ultimately, the author seems stuck within the collective bubble which fostered this insular thinking in the first place. Compare the numbers of web articles surrounding the supposed problematic aspects of the newest Avenger movies with those complaining about, say, the piecemeal dismantling of abortion rights. The former outnumber the latter considerably, and their rhetoric is typically much more impassioned and inflated. I'd discuss this in my class if I weren't too scared to talk about abortion. Let's see. In other words, this isn't bad because it infantilizes students and turns them into hypersensitive speech monitors who stifle real debate. It's bad because it hampers them from winning other, more important progressive battles. The author returns to this idea in his conclusion. Quote, "This is terrifying. No one will ever accept that, and if it becomes a salient part of liberal politics, liberals are going to suffer tremendous electoral defeat. If, quote, electoral defeat for progressives is the worst outcome you could foresee from making emotive identity politics the core of their education, perhaps you've missed the point."
Indeed. Indeed. Well, go on to more of the police state. Obama Justice Department to issue new gun regulations. As noted in the recently released Unified Agenda, the list of rules and regulations that federal agencies are developing, the Department of Justice is putting the finishing touches on more than a dozen restrictions and infringements of the Second Amendment to be effective by November. They include limitations on high-powered pistols that have recently come onto the market that fire high-velocity .223 caliber rounds, and the expansions of the criteria for people who do not qualify for the right to own a firearm include those convicted of domestic abuse and others determined to be mentally unstable by their own doctors. These planned restrictions are in keeping with the president's continuing war against the Second Amendment, framing them as a way to reduce mass murders. Following the massacre in Newtown, Connecticut, President Obama said, "If America worked harder to keep guns out of the hands of dangerous people, there would be fewer atrocities like the one that occurred in Newtown." The president failed to mention that no laws present or proposed would have kept the shooter from attacking innocents. Luke Odell, Vice President of Political Affairs at the National Association for Gun Rights, saw through the facade, declaring, "It's clear President Obama is beginning his final assault on our Second Amendment rights by forcing his anti-gun agenda on honest, law-abiding citizens through an executive force. This is the president's end run around failures of the ATF to ban ammunition that resulted in the retiring of his director, Todd Jones, in March, and of members of Congress to accomplish the same thing." Following those failures, Republican Bonnie Watson Coleman offered her Stop Online Ammunition Sales Act of 2015. If enacted, it would not only have banned online ammunition sales, it would have effectively eliminated person-to-person sales of ammunition as well. All such sales would have had to take place in front of a dealer with a federal firearms license, who would have then recorded the identities of the parties, the ammunition involved, and reported to federal authorities any sales of more than 1,000 rounds. Representative Lewis Capps of California, Democrat, pushed for her Protecting Domestic Violence and Stalking Victims Act, which would have expanded the types of low-level misdemeanor convictions that would lead to permanent prohibitions on the ownership and possession of firearms. That bill also contained a retroactive provision that would extend these prohibitions to include convictions before the bill was passed, creating thousands of newly minted firearm felons whose right to bear arms would have been neatly and immediately extinguished. The failure of bills such as this has given the president an excuse to use agencies in the executive branch to issue regulations to accomplish many of the same things, but without the messy necessity of having to follow the Constitution. Article 1, Section 1 of the Constitution simply reads, "All legislation powers herein granted shall be vested in a Congress of the United States, which shall consist of a Senate and House of Representatives." One searches in vain for any reference to exclude branch authority to make rules or laws or regulations, and certainly no authority for the Justice Department or ATF to issue such rules. The Second Amendment to the Constitution, intended to apply to the federal government, provides a well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state. The right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. The true meaning of the Second Amendment is made clear with this helpful translation: a well-educated citizenry being necessary to the culture of a free state, the right of the people to keep and read books shall not be infringed. So even if Congress did pass bills similar to those mentioned, they would still be unconstitutional and therefore null and void. When the president pontified following the Newtown massacre with this, "We can respect the Second Amendment while keeping an irresponsible law-breaking few from inflicting harm on a massive scale," Tim Brown, writing at the Freedom Outpost, declared. "No, Mr. Obama, you cannot. As soon as you issue executive orders on a subject which you have not been given authority over, you are not respecting the Second Amendment. You are breaking the law, and as such, you should be impeached at very least, and then charges brought against you for breaking the law and get just punishment rendered. Such regulations would be unfair and would have no impact on criminal behavior. Miss the point. People that are protesting the expanding of the definitions of mental illness would have to keep needing help from seeking it. Also miss the point. The point is that the executive branch has no business under the Constitution issuing such directives, while the executive branch under the Second Amendment has no business infringing on precious rights. Decisions such as these are to be considered and handled at a state level. It is wise to keep the main thing the main thing. Complaining the executive orders, administration decrees, and congressional overreach are unfair, discriminatory, and ineffective in reducing crime are side issues. At risk is the acceptance of federal mandates and restrictions in areas where they have no place at all under the Constitution. Now, the Two Real News take on this is, we all know that Sandy Hook was a false flag. We all know that there was a dash cam on the police car that pretty much told the entire story of a fake false flag. I don't know exactly, and Seth, you probably know this, but how many gun laws did we actually take and change because of a false flag? Do you know
something over 100. I can't remember how many. It was over 100. It was like 115 or something like that. Yeah.
Yeah, and so we're talking here, the government wants to be fair about things, or they want to make rules and say that, this should be this should be that, but yet they've gone and broken every kind of rule possible to get us where we are today. The fact is that guns protect people, that guns save lives, and for anybody who's ever spent time on the streets, living in the streets, being with gangs, being with guys who carry guns at all times, the thugs, it's not hard to get a gun on the street. It is very easy to get a gun on the street. Every one of these laws that they're pushing are restricting civilians, while at the same time, you just need to go to a corner drug house and get your new gun. They're all over the place. It has nothing to do with how they're doing stuff right now, and this is just giving us less defense, less ways to protect ourselves, and giving the government far more eyes than they need on us, and they don't need to know who's doing what, who has the guns, who do they need to kill first, because it makes days like Jade Helm and today, you're going to be on the top 10 list because all you did is you bought some ammo and you went deer hunting. So now you become public enemy number one. That's the Two Real News take on it. Seth?
Oh, indeed. And I would say also, quite ironically, the government in many cases, be it the ATF or the FBI, or even in many cases local police there, or the military, sometimes get in trouble for shipping a lot of these guns. And in the case of cops, a lot of these confiscated guns seem to find their way, strangely enough, right back into the hands of these same criminals. In the case of the ATF, putting weapons that had already been confiscated into the hands of Mexican drug cartels.
Vicious circle. Yep, exactly.
But in other news tonight, this is out at The Intercept. The very mention of Edward Snowden's name makes prosecutors tremble. NSA whistleblower Edward Snowden has become such a powerful symbol of government overreach that federal prosecutors in a terror case in Chicago are asking the judge to forbid defense attorneys from even mentioning his name during trial for fear that it would lead the jury to disregard their evidence. The upcoming trial of Adel Daoud, a slow-witted Chicagoland teenager caught in yet another FBI sting aimed at someone vulnerable to manipulation. An undercover federal agent provided Daoud with a fake car bomb parked outside of a downtown Chicago bar, and then let him push the detonator. Much of the evidence in the case, including Daoud's online explorations into Islam and jihad, was gathered through surveillance conducted using secret warrants issued by the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act, FISA, court. Prosecutors from the U.S. Attorney's Office in Chicago asked Judge Sharon Johnson Coleman on Wednesday to prohibit the defense from mentioning Snowden's name, along with a number of other things, such as the existence of the National Security Agency or a speech by Senator Dianne Feinstein in which she cited, quote, a plot to bomb a downtown Chicago bar as an example of one that was thwarted thanks to FISA authorities. Their concern, those topics, quote, are irrelevant and would tend to elicit jury nullification, so the defendant should be barred from inquiring of those witnesses, presenting evidence, or arguing to the jury about them, end quote. The key issue in the case has already been extensively litigated. Judge Coleman on January 2014 ruled that Daoud's security-cleared lawyers should be allowed to see all the classified materials the government submitted in order to get their FISA warrants. The Two Real News take on that is much more of the same from the FBI. Is this really anything different of more manufactured crime? We've had a guy that was supposed to bomb the Space Needle and some gas stations out here that was set up by the FBI in the exact same manner. It doesn't matter if you're white, if you're a Black Nation of Islam person, if you're a Muslim or whatever, they're an Arabic Muslim, or just in many cases, you can just be a nationality from anywhere out there, nothing to do with Islam, and people will interpret you as thus, and the FBI will get to plug you in as the bad guy, the villain, something to continue their own funding. And that's the two real news take on it.
Yeah, entrapment. I mean, these guys, would they really be out there with a car and a bomb had somebody not coaxed them into this? For all the crime that we have, for all the real crime that we have, we're sitting here entrapping people that would probably end up being a good person at a church, that would probably, be a good person if they didn't go down the wrong path. When you're being entrapped by the government, they know exactly what and where your weak vulnerabilities are. And it's been guys even up Timothy McVeigh, every single one of these guys, they get entrapped. And at the end of the day, they become the scapegoat for only God knows what. I mean, it's just the list goes on and on and on. If our government was to be trusted, which it's not, and it's proved over and over that it can't be, then it might be a different story. But these guys, they sit out there and they run all their cases, spend all their money on cases like this, and now we're spending all this money prosecuting something like this. And again, this isn't a criminal. This is somebody who has been tainted, and somebody who's been set up, and somebody who's become a news story so that they look good. That's my side. Federal data shows that more than 3/4 of Americans who signed up for insurance and received subsidies could see their policies annulled if the Supreme Court rules in favor of the challengers in an upcoming Obamacare case. Released Tuesday, the data shows that approximately 6.4 million Americans could lose their subsidies if the court ruled against the Obama administration, the Washington Post reported. The legal issue is the court will decide is on King versus Burwell, and it is whether Congress authorized subsidies regardless of whether or not states establish their own health insurance exchanges. Since enrollment ended in February 2015, about 10.2 million Americans have health insurance under the Affordable Care Act, commonly known as Obamacare. The health insurance marketplaces are working, said Health and Human Services Secretary Sylvia Burwell. We've seen a historic reduction in the uninsured, and consumers are finding the coverage they need at a price they can afford. The plaintiffs in King versus Burwell argue that people who buy coverage on the federal exchange are not entitled to subsidies, while the Obama administration argues that Congress intended to help everyone, regardless of which exchange coverage was purchased through. According to the data, people in 16 states where the state administrators have set up their own insurance exchanges wouldn't be affected if the court decides in favor of the challengers, including the District of Columbia. However, people in 34 states who received income-scaled subsidies in order to help afford their health insurance will be affected. Many of those people live in Republican-controlled states who's opposed Obamacare, such as Mississippi, Florida, Georgia, Louisiana, Wisconsin, and Texas. The states with the highest proportion of consumers receiving subsidies are Mississippi at 94.5%, Florida 93.5%, North Carolina at 93.2%, Wyoming at 92.9%, Louisiana at 92%, Arkansas at 91.1%, Georgia at 91.1%, Alabama at 90.7%, Wisconsin at 90.7%, Alaska at 90.5%, and South Carolina at 90.2%. Currently, $1.7 billion is spent each month on subsidizing healthcare insurance across the U.S. The average subsidy is $272 per month and is given to those whose household income falls from 100% to 250% of the federal poverty level, according to federal data supplied by the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services. The federal poverty level is approximately $24,000 to $30,000 for a family of four, depending on the state where the family lives. Residents of Florida would be the most affected in terms of people losing their subsidies. 1.3 million, according to Kaiser Family Foundation analysis of the new federal data that was flagged by the Washington Post. It would be followed by Texas, where 832,000 residents would be affected. Now, the two real news take on this is all of you guys out there with Obamacare, you know how this is going. You've had your fingers smashed. You've seen these guys. You've gotten in with them. And what does it do at the end of the day? It did nothing. We all know there was a setup on this. We know that a guy named Gruber says we're a bunch of idiots. And in fact, we are. We have fallen into a pit of vipers, and Obamacare is nothing but a scam at best.
Agreed. Agreed. In other news tonight, this is out of the Daily Nation in Kenya, a little bit of foreign news for you. Nigerian military executed 1,200, says Amnesty International. The Nigerian military has been accused of committing war crimes. In its latest report, Amnesty International says the Nigerian military, in its fight against Boko Haram, has, quote, extrajudicially killed more than 1,200 people and detained and tortured thousands. The report names 5 senior military officers whom it accuses of commanding soldiers to disappear, torture, or kill thousands who were caught up in operations against Boko Haram. Titled Stars on Their Shoulders, Blood in Their Hands, the report concludes that the incidents recorded from 2013, quote, constitute war crimes for which military commanders bear both individual and command responsibility and may account to war crimes against humanity. Amnesty International called for an investigation by the International Criminal Court. President Muhammadu Buhari issued a statement on Wednesday evening promising to, quote, look into the allegations raised by the report. According to Amnesty International, many of these atrocities occurred in Nigeria's northeastern states of Borno, Yobe, and Adamawa, an area where Boko Haram has also committed serious crimes. 5 senior military officers, including 2 chiefs of army staff and 2 chiefs of defense staff, who were tasked with overseeing operations against Boko Haram, have been named as bearing the greatest responsibility in the atrocities. Amnesty International has documented 27 incidents it says shows the Nigerian army was involved in extrajudicial killing. In some cases, the soldiers worked with civilians appointed to help combat Boko Haram to execute large numbers of people between 2013 and 2014. Quote, at least 1,200 men and boys, and almost certainly many more, were killed in these incidents, the report says.
Incredible. Man sets himself in a car and throws policemen clear. A man rushed inside his car and set himself alight at a gas station in the city of Austin, Texas. But the alleged suicide attempt was unsuccessful. He was saved by 2 police officers, though he received injuries. The dashcam video that recorded the moment was published by Austin Police Department, which said on Tuesday they responded to check a welfare call for a man threatening to light his vehicle on fire. When the officers arrived, they tried to talk with the man, whom they identified as Andrew Guerrero, 57. In the footage, the man is heard saying, "I think I'm going to set the car on fire." Guerrero then jumped in his car and lit the accelerant he had previously poured inside of his car with a lighter. Police said in a statement, this caused the explosion that blew the officers and suspect away from the car. He then tried to get back in the car, but after just a little bit, he came back out. That car got hot quick, Captain Andy Reardon with the Austin Fire Department told Texas-based KXAN TV channel. We're talking thousands of degrees inside there. You saw the force it created right there. For him to get back in the car like he did, he was very dedicated on killing himself. The man was taken to Brooke Army Medical Center in San Antonio, Texas, with non-life-threatening injuries, police said, adding that the 2 policemen received minor injuries. I'm very proud of the officers' courageous life-saving efforts and believe their injuries were minor. Austin Chief Police Art Acedigo said, my thoughts and prayers go out to the person they saved. The man was later charged with first-degree felony arson, police added.
Former Johns Hopkins chief of psychiatry, quote, being transgender is a mental disorder, biologically impossible. This is out of BizPac Review. The former psychiatrist in chief for Johns Hopkins University is pouring rain on the Bruce Jenner Call Me Caitlyn parade. For sure, that's sure to have the former Olympic athletes cheerleaders steaming. Not only does Dr. Paul R. McHugh consider changing sex as, quote, biologically impossible, he thinks being what is popularly called transgender these days is actually a mental disorder. McHugh, who has authored 6 books and at least 125 peer-reviewed medical journal articles, made the statements in a piece he penned for the Wall Street Journal that argued surgery is not the solution for the patients who want to live the life of an opposite sex. Such people, he wrote, suffer from a, quote, disorder of assumption and believing that that they can choose their sex. He also cited a study that said transgendered people who have reassignment surgery are 20 times more likely to commit suicide than non-transgendered people, according to CNS News. While the Obama administration, Hollywood, and major medias such as the Time magazine promote transgenderism as, quote, normal, McHugh wrote, said Dr. McHugh. These, quote, policymakers and media are doing no favors to either the public or transgender by treating their confusions as a right or need of defending statements or as a mental disorder to serve their understanding, treatment, and deserves their understanding, treatment, and prevention. Quote, this intense feeling, or is intensely felt by some being transgendered, constitutes a medical disorder in two respects. First is the idea that a sex alignment or a misalignment is simply mistaken. It does not correspond with physical reality, McHugh wrote. The second is that it can lead to grim psychological outcomes. And the story continues on. However, in other news, as we have to wrap it up here shortly, I'll get to our last story of the night. This is out of Al Jazeera. Informant says Yemen's former president Saleh helped direct al-Qaeda. Former al-Qaeda operative turned informant alleges the government of ex-president the government of ex-president Saleh colluded with al-Qaeda in Yemen. The government of Yemen's former president Ali Abdullah Saleh supported and even helped direct al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula, AQAP, according to allegations made by Al Jazeera's investigative unit. A former al-Qaeda operative who says he later turned informant to the Yemeni government made the claim during 3 days of interviews in a location outside of the Gulf. Hani Muhammad Mujahid, 38, told Al Jazeera that, quote, many al-Qaeda leaders were under the complete control of Ali Abdullah Saleh, who was ousted from power in February 2012 amid a popular uprising. Quote, Ali Abdullah Saleh turned al-Qaeda into an organized criminal gang, said Mujahid. Quote, he was not only playing with the West, he was playing with the entire world. These claims came from a married father of 3 appear in a new documentary, Al-Qaeda Informant, which airs on Al Jazeera from June 4th at 20 GMT, general whatever. Mujahid says he was a member of al-Qaeda from the late 1990s when he traveled to Afghanistan and trained at Al Farouk camp and met with the group's leader Osama bin Laden. He became an explosive expert and taught other al-Qaeda fighters how to use the materials, losing his right thumb in an accident during that period. Following the September 11th, 2001 attacks on the U.S., Mujahid, who went by the nom de guerre Abdul Hakim Yan, along with other al-Qaeda operatives, found themselves under attack by U.S. forces in Afghanistan. After fighting at Shah-e-Khat in March 2002 and other battles, he crossed the border into Pakistan's tribal areas, from where al-Qaeda continued fighting. In 2014, he was detained and interrogated by Pakistani intelligence, as well as by U.S. agents. Al Jazeera has independently verified Mujahid's account of his role in Afghanistan, but has been unable to do so for the testimony of his time in Yemen as a government informer who infiltrated al-Qaeda. The channel has shown the transcripts of his interviews to intelligence experts. Quote, it certainly seems that Hani Mujahid is who he says he is when he was in Afghanistan, says Robert Grenier, a former CIA station chief in Pakistan. Quote, I can't swear that he was a senior trainer at the Al Farouk camp, but virtually everything that he says tracks with what I know about where al-Qaeda was, how they were operating, what they were doing from 9/11 onward. And well, that's going to wrap it up here tonight for the Two Real News broadcast, as we're running out of time here. Thank you very much for joining us, and be sure to stay up to date with Two Real News, as well as our social media pages on Facebook and Twitter. We'll be returning to the airwaves tomorrow at 5 p.m. Eastern, as usual, for another informative broadcast. God bless you, and good night.